o'clock Eastern Time. I'm Deidre Woolard, editor of Millionacres, and I am here with Tim Beyers and Austin Smith. So in this hour, we usually talk a lot about companies that own real estate, or they build real estate, or they sell real estate. I kind of wanted to take things in a different direction today and talk about real estate technology, which connects to all of those things and kind of underlies them. So that's why I'm really excited to have Tim and Austin here to talk about that.
We're excited to be here. Thanks for having us.
So with fintech, everyone knows fintech, right? But not a lot of people know of proptech. So proptech is essentially real estate's fintech. There's a little bit of a sort of not a controversy around that word, but there are some people who say, well, it's not just property stuff, but proptech is sort of the word that people use when we're talking about this. And so before the pandemic, because we always have to talk about before the pandemic, proptech was really, really booming. And then obviously last year was last year and it dropped off a bit. So I'm going to see if I can share my slides with you. Let's see, this is always weird. There we go. Is that working?
Roger that.
Awesome. So I wanted to share this because proptech numbers went down last year, so almost a 25% decrease in venture capital funding. The year before that was quite big. It's been interesting to watch. Real estate has tended, in my opinion, I don't know if you guys agree, to lag a little bit behind the rest of the sort of like VC universe. And it seems like in 2019, venture capital was really discovering real estate.
I would absolutely agree with that. To say it lags behind is probably generous. I would say it's had to been dragged kicking and screaming into the VC world and into modernization. But disintermediation is coming for it one way or another.
Absolutely. So now it's back. And so there's a couple of reasons that it's back, and I think going to be bigger than ever. And a lot of that is so many companies sort of had to be dragged into using data to make decisions. And I used to work in real estate with agents, and they were very, very slow to adopt technology. And throughout real estate, there's been a little bit of that lag, but last year, no choice. All of a sudden, agents had to adopt more technology, developers had to adopt more technology, investors had to make decisions without being in person. They couldn't go walk around a property. So they're making all of these decisions based on what the data was showing them, what they could extrapolate from using virtual models and things like that. I feel like all of that had a huge benefit for really showing the value of proptech. And so the other thing I would say is that, we're all talking about reopening, right? I mean, I saw Good Morning America was doing a feature on, the reopening of America. It's crazy, but that obviously benefits real estate. Austin, you and I have studied real estate and watched, last year it was rough for a lot of our REITs. It was rough certainly for our hospitality REITs and our retail REITs, rough for real estate in general. That 2021 has shifted that in completely the opposite direction, which is awesome. And then I think
totally agree.
Exactly. And I think the other thing is, everyone is kind of ready to spend their money, and being ready to spend your money comes out in a whole bunch of different ways. We have individuals, we're ready to spend our money and go eat in restaurants and go to hotels and travel and do all of that stuff. Venture capital is looking to spend its money, and retail investors and institutional investors are also looking to spend their money. And that's another factor that I think that we're seeing right now. And then, of course, you have the SPACs. And Tim,
here come the SPACs.
Here come the SPACs.
There are so many. There are so many.
It's impossible to keep track. Deidre, I couldn't agree more, and I wanted to pause a beat on that point. I know this is very much a real estate technology and software discussion here, but if we saw that the pandemic forced a lot of adoption of more efficiencies and more technologies in the real estate space, and then we now see this sort of mass oxygenation of the market as economies reopen and people travel again. I mean, it really does look like the next few years could be absolutely fantastic for real estate, as the whole industry has now had to accelerate its adoption by 3 or 5 years, depending how you think about it. So you now have a lot of the inefficiencies that maybe the industry had going into the pandemic have now been shaken out and sort of forced out of the system. And now with all the money flowing through from reopening, it really does feel like it's going to be a fantastic time to be involved in real estate, and that's real estate management, real estate transactions. I mean, it should be a much more fluid and accelerating industry, at least as we see it right now.
I think that's right. And I'd also just want to add that I want to double underline this point you made about venture capital looking for places to invest money. There is too much venture money. There's too much private equity money in search of return. And real estate has, I think Austin's point is right, that real estate has been classically ignored by this part of the market. And because of that, it creates this vacuum that suddenly everybody's like, wow, okay, let's get in here and fund every interesting real estate tech idea. And there are going to be some terrible ones, but there are some good ones. And I mean, some of this is sort of a chasing the idea. So we see open door, pure digital iBuying, for example, and that leads venture investors to say, what else you got for me? And I think you see a lot of that happening.
Yeah, and Deidre, I know you have some excellent slides later on that show just how voluminous this space is, and that'll probably really illustrate the point that Tim is talking about, where there's just been a flood of new entrants and new VC money chasing these ideas and these trends. And hopefully we can help home in on the ones that we think are the most long-term promising and separate some. There absolutely will be some winners and some real monsters in this class of SPACs and class of prop tech IPOs that are coming. But there's a lot of competition out there, to be sure.
There's a lot of competition. And I liked what you said earlier about inefficiencies, because that's one of the things that makes me excited about certain aspects of certain companies, certain aspects of real estate technology, is that it does get away from inefficiencies. And inefficiencies aren't just annoying in real estate, they're a huge, huge cost. And I feel like one of the things that's most exciting about some of the prop tech companies that are out there, they're trying to eliminate some of those costs that come from making decisions without enough data, that come from, the old like measure twice, cut once thing. A lot of people are cutting before measuring in all kinds of ways in real estate. And, we talk about sustainability and construction waste, that factors in too. There's prop tech that we'll talk about later that helps, monitor buildings and increase efficiencies with heating and air and all sorts of things. So a lot of this really is about making the industry itself run better. And as Tim said, there are going to be ones that are like, why did that even exist? That will probably get funded, but it will also, hopefully, a lot of the funding will go to these companies that make real estate better as a whole.
I am personally excited for the real estate industry to now have its versions of pets.com and amazon.com, because I think we're going to get both. Like out of this SPAC and IPO class, we will get both.
Oh man, I want to see what the sock puppet is then. Is it a house sock puppet?
All right, so this is just the most basic version of types of prop tech, because I started to think about this and then I'm like, wait, there's so many more. But trying to break it down a little bit, because when you really think about prop tech, there's so many things. Because first of all, there's data. Buildings create a massive amount of data that for most of history hasn't really been recorded. I mean, you think, even certain things like temperature, we've all had thermostats, but now you see that, over time, when you're using something like Nest, you can determine like, okay, which were the days we were spending more, which days were we spending less? How do we then use that data? Okay, we can reorient buildings in certain ways. We've now got buildings that use automated technology where the shades open and close in certain times, or the windows open and shut. And all of that saves money, is more sustainable, makes it nicer for people inside. So there's all this stuff that data can do. Data tends to seem like something that exists in a virtual world, but it has these real applications for the physical experience of real estate.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this, and I don't know what the right analogy is, but taking sort of local expertise from human brains and putting them into bits. I don't know if it's something like Tesla, right? Collecting data on their cars, and then the vehicles get better because now all this data is aggregated, and you're able to actually act on it in a more intelligent way and improve. Tesla vehicles improve over the course of ownership, and now there's a chance that buildings can actually become more efficient after you own them because you can understand, like you said, maybe the pattern of heating and cooling and occupancy trends. So I'm particularly excited about this, not just from an energy efficiency perspective, but just a management efficiency and getting better use out of these assets. There will probably, we will see the time where there's sort of asynchronous buildings, and there will be evening tenants and there will be daytime tenants, and they might occupy the same space, but these buildings now stand a chance to become significantly more productive per square footage once you ungate this data.
That is really true. Go ahead.
No, I think there's something else to mention here. This is where my two worlds meet. A lot of this is possible because of the cloud. Like the data, you can't do anything with the data unless you have the means to process it, and you need to process it quickly. And so something that comes up in this a lot is a term you may or may not have heard of called the Internet of Things. So the Internet of Things, the basic idea here is that we want to be able to connect things that are physical plant things, property, buildings, lighting inside buildings, HVAC units, security systems, on and on and on and on and on. And we want to connect them to some kind of network so that we can collect data and then we can do something with it and take an action. That fundamentally is the ideal of the Internet of Things. It's really early, but one of these things that I've talked about many times, I may have mentioned this term more than once, called edge computing. And the idea of edge computing is you want to be able to process the data where it exists. So for example, inside of a commercial real estate application, here's probably the most basic. If you had a network inside a building and that building was designed and it had sensors that were connected to the lights, that were connected to the network, and it just said, there's been no movement for 10 minutes, turn down the lights. And so there's an automated script that runs and it's collecting data. There is no movement. The sensors are not triggering. And so we can turn down the lights. And so we can make a smart decision based on the data. And all of that is due because of the smarts of the network. So all of this is sort of building its way into buildings, homes. There's a lot of places we could take this, and it has multiple layers. Some of it has to do with just how smart can we make the cloud at the edge of the network. So I'm going to go down a really geeky rat hole, so I'm going to stop it right there. But does that make sense?
Absolutely. And Tim, that's why we want you on us for the rabbit holes. And for, believe it or not, that you were taking this to the cloud. We actually also see that in Real Estate Trailblazers, which is another service we'll be launching shortly. We actually also see a real estate play there with the data and infrastructure to support these massive facilities and all the processing and all of this data. And that there is, believe it or not, a real estate component on the other side of it as well that we are looking at very closely.
I believe it.
Well, I think the other thing that when you talk about the Internet of Things is that you're absolutely right. We're only at the beginning of it, because right now all that we're doing is we're mostly customizing larger spaces, but we can get super refined on this. The more sensors that buildings have, the more data you collect, the more customized that a space really can be to you. Right now we have like smart home technology. You can walk in and, the heating is set up right, and the lighting is the way you like it. We have the potential to do that with all sorts of buildings and really customize experience for people. And I think that's a huge trend. I think that it's going to, the amount of retrofitting that needs to take place in cities is just massive, especially when you talk about cities that are also making moves toward energy efficiency. We've got New York making new rules about buildings and what they can and can't have to be energy efficient. There's going to be so much activity there, so much funding needed, and so many systems to be installed that it's just massive when you think about it.
Yeah, anywhere there is space. This would be the other way I would talk about it. Just if you think about property and property tech, expand your thinking about what property is. So for example, a curbside is property. It's city property. It doesn't belong to somebody except for the city. But how inefficient is a curb? It is massively inefficient. I will tell you this, it is massively, massively inefficient, especially in cities. And so if you were like, and here's the use case for it. We want to reduce emissions. Okay, if we want to reduce emissions, what's the one thing we want to be able to do? Stop vehicles from running their engine on a curbside for like 10 minutes while they deliver packages, whatever they're doing. We want to be able to get it in and out. So if you can make those curbs more functional, if you could reserve them, if they had a limited, you had limited time you could get in there and they were actively managed, but you had to do that with some kind of networked property technology, you could create a lot of really interesting use cases, and you could probably raise revenue, reduce emissions, name your use case, but you can't do it until you treat that piece of property as something, that space that you could make more efficient and is active, instead of something that somebody slugs a car in there and now we're jammed up and that's just what happens.
I think that's really true. And it's interesting to me because it's a little bit what Google is trying to do with the Sidewalks Lab project in Toronto, that idea
a lot
of
of
making
companies working on this
system.
for sure. Yeah.
Because if you had that, if let's say your curb is smart, that connects directly to autonomous deliveries and things like that. You have a sensor built into the curb and the vehicle can essentially interact. And once you start doing that, I mean, the potential for deliveries for everything is just huge.
Yeah. And it could also be like, Austin's car parks in the city here and like, hey, Austin, you're not allowed to park here, man. Or, like I roll up and be like, hey, dude, this is Austin's space. You're not allowed to park here. And then you get a warning and move on or not. And, then you're on your own, then you get a ticket. But there's definitely a lot more that we could do, with things. So property tech is pretty expansive. We tend to think of it in terms of homes and buildings, but it's way bigger than that, is my point.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that I had on the slide here that I'm really fascinated with is warehouse tech. I was at Urban Land Institute's conference yesterday and hearing about some of the industrial projects that are going on, because when you think about industrial warehouse space, most of it is still just space, just open space. And the potential to have robotics for, picking up packages, moving things around, making more efficient use of that space, sensors in individual areas to make sure that everything is the right temperature and the right humidity and all of that. The potential for robotics in both in industrial and also in storage is just so huge, and such a small portion of warehouse space right now is using that kind of technology.
Yeah, for sure. No doubt.
And so the last part of this that I want to talk about on this slide is residential, because I feel like with residential, Tim, Austin, you and I have all talked about Zillow and Redfin and iBuying. So that's part of it. It's also mortgage. It's all about making that process more simple, because I mean, that process is so complicated. I've never heard of a single person say like, oh yeah, buying a home, that was no big deal. It's like, no, I had to find all of this, all of my, tax returns from years ago, and everything was paper, and I'm sending things different places, and nobody seems to know what's going to happen next. And then I get this inspection report, and oh wait, that's another complicated thing. Then the other part of that too is that, and this is where I think things are going, but haven't gotten to yet, is that there's no single platform. All of the people that are connected to your transaction are all producing documents, and they're all sharing them mostly still via email. I mean, you've got things like DocuSign, But the comprehensive platform thing is something that a lot of companies are working on. No one has quite fully solved it yet, but I feel like we're very close to it. What do you guys think?
Yeah, nowhere has sort of the upending of the old economy of real estate been more visible than in the residential sector, I think. I mean, we think even as recently as a couple of years ago, right, wet signatures were the norm. You had to go to a bank and sign documents in person. You had to drive from one site to the other, take a whole day off just to do showings, very inefficient. Now you can sign remotely, you can tour remotely, you can even get financing remotely without ever having to set foot in a bank. And these were all not impossible to imagine, but certainly unusual a few years ago. We bought our home 5 years ago, and it was like the big joke. It was like this big thing that we bought it through FaceTime. And now people can tour home through Matterport from Matterport on the other side of the country and never have to step foot in, they don't have to get on a plane. They don't have to take a weekend off. They never have to step foot inside the property. So I think this is the easiest space for people to visualize the changing digitization of real estate and just how many inefficiencies it brings out. The financing side is an enormous one. The sort of rise of the dedicated e-lender probably doesn't get enough attention in my opinion, but you see almost all of these lenders are so much more affordable and efficient and better at processing your application than your traditional bank, where they're like, oh, can you run me down that photocopy of your license? Or, oh, we actually need 3 forms of ID, and can you come by and, confirm your blood type or whatever the case may be. It's so much easier to do financing online now and never have to walk into a Wells Fargo or a JP Morgan. So the whole process, end to end, touring, signing, showing, inspections can all be done remotely, and it's incredibly easy, and it oxygenates the whole process. What was normally a very painful, typically 30 to 45 day process is now a very easy 20 to 30 day process, and that can go down even lower if you think about iBuyers and the ability to just sell or buy easily from those entities on your own schedule.
I mean, I think the thing that I'm most interested in, obviously I'm a huge fan of Redfin. Everybody knows that, right? Confirmation bias for the win here. Austin will appreciate that. But he talks about, Glenn Kelman, the CEO, talks about how there is an opportunity in lower income communities to bring home ownership to those communities. The way you do that, honestly, is sort of rethinking the way you fund some home ownership, because it's classically designed, at least in my opinion. So I could be wrong here, maybe changing faster than I think, but if it's classically designed for a either significant 1 income or 2 income household, you're moving in, you're making a huge commitment on a 30-year mortgage, and it's kind of hardened. There's like mortgage models that existed for a long period of time. And one of the opportunities here, I think, is as we get more interested in data and as we get more interested in how we build out homes and where we build out homes, we're going to have different financing models. And some of these property tech companies, and I'm thinking mostly of Redfin here, are going to be really interesting in how they figure out how to get people who classically haven't been in a home into a home without taking us back to the subprime nightmare of 2007, 2008. It's a big challenge, but I think it's a really rich opportunity.
I agree. And Tim, I know you and I are both Redfin fanboys here, but it does seem that Redfin has a unique opportunity to just provide a much better experience to buyers. I mean, it seems so common that agents and banks, although they're supposed to be partners in the transaction, they speak a different language. Maybe the agent is showing somebody more house than they can afford, or the bank is lending, way beyond what's reasonable for that individual. You can imagine a situation where Redfin, because they have the financing and the listings and the agent capacity, can sort of show you a much more comfortable set of homes. So they're not stretching you and showing you this home that's 20% above budget, and then you have to try and stretch for it. I don't know that that's literally what they're doing, but you could imagine that being is something that they're able to do a lot more easily, is just show people homes that they're already qualified for comfortably, with having all that information already available to them.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a real opportunity for a more customized experience. And that may be, I mean, you guys would know this better than I would, So I imagine that might be a little uncomfortable for the traditional real estate agent, because there's a little bit of filtering that goes on, before you actually get to the agent. And my impression is the agent's like, well, wait a minute, I'm the filter. Don't listen to the technology, I'm the filter. So it feels a little disruptive to the traditional real estate model, but maybe I'm wrong there.
I'm not sure if it's disruptive. I do think agents, if we talk about adding efficiency to this system, and I might throw a bit of a grenade here, I do think that agents are sort of one of the last holdouts of the biggest points of friction, which is the agent commission. So I'm not sure about the tension that that you had just mentioned, Tim, but it seems like so much of the system is becoming oxygenated, and discount brokerages are going to have to fight very hard to get that last highest friction point whittled down, which is the agent commission, taking it from 6 to 5 to 4. Redfin certainly is undercutting that dramatically, but there's still only a minority of transactions in the US. We have seen agent commissions compress a little bit, but when you look at the dollar amounts involved in the transaction, that friction point is still one of the largest, right? People would be a lot more fluid in buying and selling homes if that barrier was compressed to the level that Redfin aspires to get it to. At least that's my opinion. Deidre, that's a tough one. I definitely want to get your opinion on this, given your experience in this sector.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like my experience in the sector is that, when I was working with Realtor.com over 10 years ago, there was a lot of talk of like, oh, well, if everyone can find their house online, they won't need a real estate agent anymore. That was the fear 10 years ago. That fear didn't come to pass. I don't think you get rid of the agent that easily on the residential side, simply because it is still that very emotional thing. You still seem to need that guide. It's changed a little bit, but I still see that there are still people that want to have an agent. And the interesting thing, all of the NAR data that I see, there isn't a generational shift, because that was the fear originally, was that, the digital native would decide to buy a house and they would decide that they didn't need to have an agent. And so far that has not proved to be the case.
I agree with that, actually. And I want to make sure that I can clarify my point there. I think the agent involvement in the transaction is incredibly resilient and sticky and important. People do want it. What I'm curious about is the compression of that service as the fee of it, and whether or not that's that. So I didn't mean to misspeak, and that I believe agents are a part of the transaction for a long time. It's very important, and people still want that and benefit from it. And also just telling people, keeping people on schedule, telling them, oh, your inspector's going out Tuesday. Here's how we interpret the inspection report. It's very important, but it would seem to me that the fee is going to become a battleground pretty quickly. I don't know.
I think that's very true. I think the fee is a battleground. I think with Redfin, treating agents as salaried, we saw that issue though when the market stopped last year.
Right.
They furloughed 41% of agents. It was this huge problem. Yeah. So big issue. But I do feel like the role of the agent is changing, and the way that they get compensated necessarily will change, but that the agent isn't going anywhere. It's one of the reasons that I still believe in investing in real estate brokerages, because I don't see that like completely disappearing at all.
I completely agree, despite the rise of iBuyers who have a role to play here. Deidre, I'm sorry, we definitely took you on some tangents here. Back to proptech, shall we?
Back to proptech. All right. So just quickly wanted to go through some of the major players here. One of the things that's interesting is real estate brokerages, which we just talked about, are starting to figure out how to invest in proptech. So you have Vector Group, which is Douglas Elliman's parent company. They just announced their New Valley Ventures firm, but you've also got Remax. Remax has bought a bunch of different companies, including Bouge and First and other like sort of emerging prop tech. Compass just bought Glide, which is it's essentially a way to look at offers online and to look at all of the offers sort of in one place through one platform versus, a bunch of contracts spread out on a table. So, and Compass has bought other things before. So they've been investing in things like that. You've got Tishman Speyer, which has, I believe, 2 SPACs, one of which is taking Latch Public, you have Lennar, the home builder, their venture, they invested in Sonder, which is now going public via a different SPAC. Sonder is sort of like a cross between between Airbnb and apartment rentals, kind of one of the short-term rental companies that actually made it through the pandemic without suffering too much, and so and is now getting an opportunity to go public. One of the biggest things has been Fifth Wall. So Fifth Wall is a venture firm that emerged in Santa Monica, I believe 3 or 4 years ago, and they decided they were going to invest in everything in the built world, and they've sort of emerged out of that Silicon Beach culture that's happening in Santa Monica and Venice. 3 SPACs so far. I believe each one has been between 250 and 300 million. The first company is Smart Rent, which does smart tech for houses, and they have a partnership with Lennar as well, because all of this always comes to see this industry is massive and also small. And then lastly, Spencer Rascoff with his Supernova SPACs, and the first one taking OfferPad public, which I have found endlessly fascinating. The idea that Spencer Rascoff is backing he's former CEO of Zillow, and he's backing this potential Zillow competitor in iBuying. OfferPad has been probably if Zillow, Redfin, and Opendoor, the big 3, OfferPad to me is the dark dark horse, maybe the 4th competitor. But they're doing some interesting things, and I wouldn't count them out.
No, absolutely not. I mean, the space is growing so fast that I mean, they might be the lift to Opendoor's Uber, but that's still a great place to be. This industry has so many tailwinds behind it, a lot of good money and capital going into it. I agree, they are a dark horse to watch. And Spencer Rascoff, I mean, it's hard to imagine somebody more connected in this space, right? Definitely a bit of I don't know what we want to call it, sibling rivalry or tension, I imagine, there between Zillow, but it's going to be an interesting one to watch. And certainly don't count Spencer out. Zillow had a fantastic run under his leadership. It has also under Rich Barton's tenure, but he's well connected. He understands the space. This one is a very interesting one to keep an eye on.
So just quickly on this slide, what this means for investors. A lot of new companies to invest in and a lot of need to filter those companies. The thing that I worry about most is this idea of companies going public before they're ready. I think that's the biggest risk with SPACs. And, we've seen this before when a lot of venture capital comes in. We saw this, the first .com bust 20 years ago, because people were investing based on, on a PowerPoint presentation. And there were a lot of companies that got too much money too fast. You'd think we learned our lessons, but no. I mean, the same thing happened with WeWork to some extent too, is just the money, in my opinion, a lot of venture capital money starts to create an obligation in a company to produce results, and it may result in too rapid expansion. I kind of liken it to when you're making bread and you put if you put too much sugar in there, then the yeast goes crazy and then it all dies. That kind of happens with startups, where if there's too much money, too much pressure, they're not growing organically. They can kind of implode, which I think was part of WeWork's problem.
Oh, please, Tim.
Okay, I just wanted to quickly point this out here. So I had a conversation, this is a long time ago, with a venture capitalist who shall remain unnamed. But he said to me, and I've never forgotten this, it's just like, his point was that money makes companies dumb, makes them dumb. And the strategy for this VC firm, it's not like to, choke a company and not give them enough, but they didn't like companies that looked at a funding round as an accomplishment. And that is a temptation. When you're a startup, you put out a press release that says something like, we've just raised, I'll make up a number, $125 million in funding, or you have a massive IPO. Please remember, that is a non-event. Like if it's a massive IPO, good. The balance sheet is secure for the short term, but that really doesn't say anything about the actual, unit economics of the business and its ability to generate meaningful margin improvement, cash flow over time. It doesn't say anything about any of that. So this VC, I thought it was striking when he said it, but it totally makes sense to me now, in hindsight. Companies that raise a lot of funds and then consequently get drunk on that and spend a lot of money end up being some of the worst investments. Austin, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, actually, that was a fantastic point. It dovetails nicely. I was actually going to bring in WeWork and say, I can't decide if WeWork was early or over oxygenated, and maybe the answer is both. We're talking about using spaces more efficiently, and at a surface level, WeWork and co-working seem to do that, right? You use your square footage better. You have efficient access systems, efficient mail systems. It's a really good way to use square footage. But then when you get down to the actual operations of it, way too much capital. They ran way too fast. Their model of subleasing was reckless. So it's this case of the idea itself executed differently and probably executed with less capital could be a home run. But the idea executed too early with too much capital, you make the mistakes that WeWork made. So, let's try and find the anti-WeWork in this class of SPACs and IPOs. And maybe the new reinvented WeWork is actually one of those. But I think a really good point that you both made, just the idea could have been good and it almost suffocated under too much money and trying to go too fast.
Do you think, and this is a question for both of you, like it seems to me, we talk about unit economics. We talk about this a lot in investing, and it's different for every type of company, but it's basically a unit economics is what's the unit of something that you provide to a customer that they are willing to pay for that gives them value. Yep. And as you sell more of those units, something we call economies of scale is the more units that we sell, the greater our margins become because we've got some fixed costs in order to serve a customer well and things like that. Do you think the unit economics in real estate, does it always boil down to how efficient you are per square foot?
I don't think it always does. There's definitely some aspects of real estate, and Deidre could speak most qualified to this that are just sort of in a supernatural tier of luxury real estate. That's probably not a unit economics game. But commercial real estate, I think, is increasingly, it's going to come down to price per square foot, right? Price per square foot, and your expenses per square foot. So that's not all real estate, but it's a huge aspect of real estate. And we are seeing that, sort of, you think of the hyper efficiency end, warehouses and fulfillment are already playing that game and have proven that if they can be more efficient per square foot for their customers, they can charge a premium rent. So I'd say definitely on commercial industrial for sure. Commercial office is probably waking up to that game, I think, and has a chance to do much better there. I don't know about residential, and I would say definitely not luxury.
Okay. So Deidre, is it fair to say then that, especially in the sectors that Austin just mentioned here, so this idea of property tech and taking down the cost, of basically you're using tech to manage your cost and manage your cost per square foot. This is one of the key areas where prop tech is so huge.
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the things that you're going to see is not just price per square foot. It's going to come down to utility per square foot. Yep. Of how much space you're getting out of things. I mean, talking about industrial and talking about the merging between industrial and retail. Tim, you and I have talked a lot about this before, about how stores are going to having to change because you've got Instacart pickers and you've got e-commerce and you've got curbside and you've got my favorite acronym, BOPUS. You've got so much happening. BOPUS. I had to bring in BOPUS. But you've got so much going on there that it's not just about the price per square foot. It's going to be about how kind of almost like how alive that square footage is, what systems can be put in there, how can it be used, what access does it have to, to the frontage versus to the back where trucks could come in or something like that. All of that is going to play a role, and real estate is part of real estate getting smarter is real estate getting more efficient.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And Tim, to even take it beyond the narrative, and maybe for our listeners who are looking for a real use case here, I would look at Terreno Realty, which is not a household name, not a popular stock. The ticker symbol for anybody who wants to look it up is TRNO. So this is an industrial REIT that focuses on buying infill warehouses in major cities where it's hard to build. There's not a lot of available square footage, and they buy these and they make them more efficient for e-commerce and distribution. That's their entire play. They're not developers. They go in and they make buildings more efficient. And this stock has absolutely destroyed the S&P over its tenure. I don't want to misquote it here, but in 5 years, it's up almost from $20 to about 60. The max charts start to get even more incredible. And this is a pure industrial efficiency play. So they're not building, they just go in and they make the buildings operate better. And that's exactly what technology does, right? So maybe they were making these buildings operate better with their own expertise. And now there's a case for other industrial companies to leverage software to maybe operate at the same degree of efficiency, better utilities usage, better throughput of materials, and inventory for customers. So if people are looking for a real use case of how much value can be created just by making square footage more efficient, Terreno Realty, TRNO, is an interesting one to look at.
All right. Noted.
All right. So next, so questions to ask when you're thinking about prop tech. Certainly, what problem does it solve, and how big is that problem? Because a lot of things talking about money making people stupid. I've found that in the past, sometimes whole companies will start up around solving one piece of a problem, and then you see another larger company just take that piece and kind of enfold it into them, and then that little startup has kind of no value. A lot of people are saying to some extent that that's what's going to happen with Clubhouse and social media, is that Instagram or Facebook or Twitter is just going to take that idea and fold it. And I think that happens in real estate too. So it's definitely, how big is the problem? How many people will benefit from it? How big is the user base that needs to solve that problem? Certainly competition, also how old the company is. Talking about, we talked about that before, about this idea of not going public too soon. I feel like we're already seeing companies go public too soon. So I think that's important to look at, is you want to see you want to see that they at least have enough of a user base, enough of a history that they're actually doing the thing that they said they were going to do. Because sometimes I'm seeing early companies have a small user base. They're maybe in one or two markets. They haven't really tested it on the larger front. And you could say that iBuying started to some extent that way, although now it's sort of proved itself, on the larger scale. But in the beginning, iBuying was just starting in, one or two cities.
I think you could say this is certainly true in technology. I think it's definitely true of most innovators. The younger the company is, the more likely it is you have found a one-trick pony. Beware. The younger the company is, if it rushes to go public, it's not a power law, but it's pretty darn close. The younger the company is, the more likely it is it's a one-trick pony. And it may not stay a one-trick pony, but if it comes public and it's funding its move to another market with your dollars as a public market investor, know what you're getting into. Just know what you're getting into. That's all.
That's a really good point. Does that make you worried about Opendoor, which is essentially a one-trick pony, but is gradually starting to try to become, another type of pony?
Well, it did make me worried about it. I mean, I think we talked about it here. And I know we're going to move on to this slide here, but Deidre, you and I talked about this. I was like, yeah, it seems awesome, but it does feel like a one-trick pony to me. And when I sort of put it in the category of, okay, here's Opendoor, here's Redfin, here's Zillow. I know what Zillow does. I don't love that Zillow has sort of this contentious relationship with some of the people who buy its leads, who hate that they have to buy those. I don't love that.
Yeah.
But I get that gives them a huge amount of capital to put to work in other places. And I trust that Rich Barton is putting that capital to work in things like iBuying, and it is the undisputed leader in residential real estate data, period. So there, it has some clear advantages there. Open Doors and iBuyer, and so that's different. And then Redfin in the middle between these two has a vertical value chain for, you know, creating lifetime value for a customer that decides that, yeah, I'm going to use a Redfin broker, and then use them again and again and again and again because they get everything from the Redfin experience. So it just feels very different to me. That is not to say that Open Door is a bad idea. It's just, it has a limit. And now what can it do to expand its user base? I think the answer to that is beyond my understanding so far, but you guys may have a better take on it than I do.
No, I actually, Tim, I agree. Open Door makes me both nervous and exciting. You know, you and I have talked a lot about iBuying, and I feel like we've gone back and forth on it over the years. And
right,
the idea is very good at first impression. The economics so far are still very challenged. It looks like people are still not making or figuring out how to make meaningful money here. But there's so much money in motion that I think as long as there is still growth in adoption and there is still growth in the idea and acceptance of it, that they'll probably do okay, right? If people can get used to the idea that they're buying or selling homes through a company or through an app, or, you know, this different way of selling homes, if that idea can get adoption and they can hang on long enough, and they're certainly getting enough, they have enough capital, it looks like they can, I think it'll be okay. But of all of them, you know, Redfin is still probably my favorite pick for the very reason you mentioned. They're vertically integrated. They offer multiple services. They can provide value up and down the supply chain, whether you want to use them as a lender or not. You know, they can really offer whatever people are looking for. It feels like Redfin did the hard work of investing in all of this value add early on, and they can now offer it to all of their buyers and sellers in a way that's good for them. Whereas OfferPad or Open Door is just going straight at one big promising idea as hard and as fast as they can, which could flame out. Could not.
Yeah, it might. I mean, so Deidre, I want to kick this to you here, but I would say the difference between those three, the way I see it, I think Redfin is the one that built the flywheel. I think Redfin has built the flywheel really hard, lots of hard stuff that Austin was mentioning here. And so as the elements of the flywheel start to feed each other, like you come in for mortgage, you get title, you get a home, you're in the home, you sell the home, you move to the next home. There's a real flywheel effect there. Zillow has a decent chance to build one too, but I think Zillow's still building it, and I don't think Open Door has one yet. And maybe OfferPad and Open Door might get one someday.
I think you're right to some extent. I think with Zillow, they didn't decide that they wanted to be in the brokerage business until relatively recently, and their business was fairly mature as a Spencer Raskoff used to call it, a media company. I mean, that was originally just the idea. We're going to put out all of this content, and then, and that's how we're going to make our money, and that's how we're going to sell these leads. And that's still the primary engine, but now they're building all these other engines at the same time. And so there is definitely a catch-up process there. So the only thing I wanted to bring up from this slide is just this idea of a lot of players doing the same thing, because that's something I think is going to be really important for investors to keep in mind when we think about prop tech. There's a lot of duplication here, and you don't necessarily need to pick the winner in any of these segments, in my opinion. You just have to pick one of the winners. You don't have to get, it's not like a horse race. You don't have to have the winner. You can make plenty of money on the place or the show. And so I wanted to bring in Tom Vest Ventures. I recently interviewed one of their founders, and it's going to be on the Millionacres podcast. But they do these market maps, and I've got three of them I want to show you. The first one is construction, and you could just see how many of these companies are here. And most of these I haven't really heard of, but there are there's a few I've heard of, ranging in all kinds of sizes. And one of the things I like about the market maps that they've created here is they kind of divide them into segments. So you look at this construction map, it gives you an idea of what types of companies. So, okay, you've got the things that design and plan, you've got tools that you use in the field. You've got things that benefit developers. You've got virtual models. There's so many different types of things that are out there, and some of these will become big companies. Some of these won't. I mean, you've got things like Katera in there, and Factory OS, and Blockable, companies that may be the next big thing, may be really huge. So interesting to see just how big the market is.
Deidre, I really love these visuals. I think you actually have more than one, but they really do a good job in my mind of showing the breadth of this space. When we talk about real estate, people maybe they pull on whatever their immediate reference point is. It might be their primary home, or it might be their office, but really it's infrastructure, it's warehouses, it's your home, it's your office, it's retail, it's restaurants, it's everything in between, it's hospitality, and there's so many different ways that this industry is changing. And if people look at this and they're looking for a homing mechanism to figure out on which aspects of real estate prop tech that we are looking at on Millionacres and that we're excited by, the areas that have caught our attention are iBuying, home viewing and dating, and data, not dating. And so Zillow, Redfin.
That would be amazing, by the way. I'm looking forward to your startup that does that.
Home buying and dating.
Match plus Zillow, it's a winner.
Do it all at the same time, right? I mean, Match is just a precursor to Zillow.
100%.
And mortgage lenders, this is one that we talked about a little bit here, but online lenders and mortgage lenders probably don't get enough attention because it's considered sort of an old industry product, but really the addition of tech and efficiencies to that space are really promising, both for investors and lenders.
Yeah, so let's dive into that a little bit, because our last slide here is these investable ideas. We've talked a little bit about the iBuying and the online marketplaces. One of them in here also is CoStar. I've been following CoStar for a while. I get more and more excited about it. I've finally bought myself some, just because I feel like their CEO really fascinates me. He's been pretty aggressive in the past. He's coming for the residential market in a huge way by buying homes.com and HomeSnap. He did it with apartments.com. It's very interesting to see what's going to happen there. What do you guys think about CoStar? Boy,
CoStar has been like I don't want to call them a sleeping giant, because if you're in real estate, people certainly know who CoStar is. But I think, I still think that term might be appropriate, because people still, even though they're aware that CoStar exists, don't appreciate how dominant they are. I mean, CoStar really just absolutely is the leader here so far and away.
I'd agree with that. I didn't realize just how large this gorilla is, and it is the 800-pound gorilla here. And considering, I mean, Deidre, the thing that sort of scared me about CoStar is when we were on the Saturday shows and you were talking to me about how litigious CoStar can be, how if they really do like literally throw their weight around, they are not timid, and that is scary. And potentially, if you are an investor, it potentially creates some artificial tailwinds there, in the sense that if they're going to throw their weight around, they can make, in some cases, some of their own market opportunity. But, I wouldn't just say it's guaranteed win here. They're just throwing their weight around, and they got a lot of weight to throw around.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people are saying that nobody can unseat Zillow as the traffic leader in residential real estate search. I don't believe that. That's partly because I worked for Realtor.com when they were number one, and then Zillow came along and ate our lunch, and that was awful. But it showed me, Zillow came in and they had a better strategy than we did, and they created the Zestimate, and they started doing all these press releases using their data, and they just gradually got more and more market share. Mm-hmm. And so it would be a hard road for CoStar or any other company to unseat them. But you look at Redfin was a distant fourth, distant fifth for a long time. Now they're in the top three of residential search. Redfin's getting very active with their ad campaigns and, spending a lot of money. Glenn Kelman talked about that on the recent call. So it's going to be a race right now for all of those eyeballs of everyone who's trying to buy a home right now.
Absolutely. Deidre, I want to call it GHVI here. This is the SPAC that's taking Matterport public. I just have to mention this because I think this is some of the coolest technology that I've ever seen. And this is, to anybody who liked, scrolling through Zillow for the past few years or Redfin and just sort of, dream hunting for homes, this adds a whole new layer of depth to it. So anybody who has not experienced a Matterport tour should search Matterport, Matterport, and just fully appreciate how much this improves the buying experience here. This technology is so cool. It's so fun to use. It's integrated in with a lot of listings, including Redfin in Mass here. And this is the ticker symbol for the SPAC that's taking it public, which is Gore Holdings. So if people don't recognize that, that's why it's a SPAC. It's still new on the market, but the technology behind it is so cool and so fun.
Well, the thing that I'm really excited about with Matterport is, they are the #1 in residential, but they've got a lot of potential to get better at commercial too. And talking about digital twins and really the value of having a complete virtual tour for commercial, we talked before about all of those spaces that are not being utilized correctly. Something like Matterport that can create a digital twin of something, it makes it so much easier to plot out how to use that space, what kinds of systems you can put in. It's really just at the very beginning of what it can do, in my opinion.
I totally agree, and they may actually already be doing this, but I'm not sure. But I think the potential for to make an architect's life easier or a designer's life easier with Matterport data and converting it to CAD drawings is such an efficiency gain in utilizing that space better. You're coming back to our theme again and again, just using space better, more efficiently, more effectively. Simply the process of measuring a building to figure out, that process that you have to go through to figure out where it makes sense to put an addition or a new loading ramp, or how much room do you have to get boxes in and out. It's so much easier if you can have that building 3D rendered walk through, and then have all of the blueprints in front of you. Then you can do the productive work of figuring out how to use the building instead of spending all your time measuring it.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up here, we've got about 2 minutes left. I want to get into that last bullet there, lending. Austin, what are you seeing in that space? We talked a little bit before about, about making the mortgage process faster.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
I think the trend here is sort of getting overshadowed by people just moving in mass and taking on mortgages as quickly as they can get them right now. That's sort of a migratory trend. But as far as the actual lending industry itself, it's so much faster and easier and more efficient. So I haven't seen data, so I don't want to misquote it on the average close time, but I know it's compressing. It's just faster to close on a loan today than it was 5 years ago, because these lenders, they have an assembly line and it can be all digital, and you upload your tax returns and all your documents. You can upload all your material effectively in an evening and be underwritten really easily without having to go to your bank and work with your former lender. So what we're seeing here, aside from just a huge wave of mortgages that people are taking out because there's a migratory trend, the process is faster. And because it's faster and more efficient, there's also just better lending rates. I mean, it's some of that, of course, is macroeconomic, and it's not just a product of efficiencies, but it's there underneath both of these other bigger trends. Is just how much faster you can underwrite and how much more affordably you can lend as a result.
Do you think there's any chance, like in this last minute here, we could answer Stephanie's questions about our favorite prop tech stock? Like I can come up with one.
Sure.
And I know you will both guess it, but do you guys have one each to give a favorite prop tech stock?
Deidre?
You guys know it's going to be CoStar.
Yeah.
For some reason, that has just become the stock that I'm really most interested in, and partly I think that it is the fact that they are able to acquire things and then build them into their system. It's one of the reasons that makes me excited also about Redfin is I feel like Redfin right now has this tremendous opportunity with RentPath. They've never really bought something and integrated it. I'm very excited to see what they do. But I still believe that CoStar really has a potential to make some big waves in residential real estate and make a lot of money at the same time.
All right. So CSGP. Austin, what do you got?
I have one, but I also have a disclosure with it. So this is Latch. And it's going public through a SPAC, TSI Innovation Acquisitions. I think the symbol will eventually be LTCH, but right now it's TSIA. Now, what's so exciting about this, this company is very small, which is great, and they are looking to basically be the platform of building. So to do, what people maybe thought Apple HomeKit or Google Nest could have done for residential, Latch is really looking to do for all buildings and largely commercial. So they partnered with, Deidre, do you know the big apartment development that they work with? Is it Mid-America or no, it's Alexandria REITs, isn't it? They work with one of the largest multifamily operators in the US. The name escapes me now. But Tim, what's unbelievable here is this company has never lost a customer since 2014. They have 100% gross dollar retention, and existing customers are spending more, I think about 30% more each year. But let me, I don't want to misquote that. So let's say it's approximate. So basically, I mean, the best customer retention you could possibly have, the promise to become a platform of buildings. Now, with that said, in my asterisk, my disclosure is a lot of people have tried to become the one-stop shop solution for building operations, and it hasn't gone very well. I think Latch has what it takes, but the big companies like Honeywell and Google and others have tried this and nothing has stuck. It's really hard to become the de facto platform leader here. I think what they're doing, which is smart, is partnering with some of the biggest multifamily operators and getting that early mass adoption at that scale. And now I know we're 2 minutes over and we've taken time from Brian and Toby, so I have to apologize now on behalf of Millionacres.
No, I mean, look, it's important to ask that question. I mean, the obvious one for me is Redfin. So I'll just say, of course, Redfin, but I also am a big fan of the Gores Holdings 6, which is GHVI. And that's the one that's taking Matterport public. And I got to say, the more I look into Matterport and the tech behind it and how it works, I am fascinated. I'm completely blown away by it. I love Redfin, but I'm definitely interested in what Matterport is going to become. So I know, sorry, Toby and Brian, we threw a monkey wrench in there, but I wanted to get the favorites. Like we had them all, but we should get the favorites out there because, remember first.